colleagues, thank you so much for taking the time to join this webinar. As I said, we ran one this morning, which was really engaging conversation. We had some excellent speakers, so no pressure on our wonderful speakers today, who I'm sure will do an equally good job. Just as we start off, just a little bit of housekeeping for colleagues. As you join, please keep your webcams off and microphones muted. There's hopefully a little bit of time for discussion at the end, and we might invite you to turn them on then, but it can be quite distracting for the speakers and for the people who are managing the chat to have too many cameras on. So if you can keep those off, that'd be fantastic. You'll get a little pop-up to say that the session is being recorded. That is so we're very aware that colleagues can't always join these meetings, and they want to catch up on the recordings afterwards. So the session is being recorded. But I should also say on that note that all of our speakers today have agreed to share their slide decks afterwards. So you'll get a link to the recording if you want to share it with your own colleagues, as well as the slide deck. The format is I'll do a little bit of an introduction to the frameworks, and then we'll hear from our two speakers, and then we'll have a combined Q&A at the end. If you do have questions for the speakers, please pop them in the chat. And I know the speakers will endeavour, after Miriam's spoken, she will answer any questions that she can in the chat. And I know we have a whole team from Reading who I'll introduce shortly, and they will also endeavour to answer questions in the chat. We're being supported by my colleague David Steed, and he is there. If you have any technical questions, just send him a private message in the chat. Okay, so I think that's all the housekeeping. So I'm going to be joined today by some fantastic presenters. As I said at the start, my name's Kay Hack. I'm lead consultant education. And I'm really delighted with this Student Success Series framework. It was an awful lot of hard work from my team to pull these together, and it's really rewarding for us to have so much engagement with the frameworks, both in terms of the number of colleagues that have downloaded them and the number of colleagues that have come along to the webinars to explore them further, and also that have listened to our podcast. So there's lots of ways for you to sort of hear different perspectives on the frameworks. And so today I'm joined by Dr. Miriam Firth, or Miri, who's the academic lead for assessment within the Flexible Learning Programme for the University of Manchester. And then we're then joined by the Centre for Quality Support and Development at the University of Reading. And we have Vicky Holmes, Michael Kilmister and Jacqueline Fairburn all speaking on the webinar, but they've got other colleagues in the background who are going to help answer your questions. So if you ask a question from Reading and somebody else answers, then that will be one of their team. So you're not being fished in the webinar. I want to start off just a little bit to highlight to you about what we've done in terms of developing the framework series. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with this, but the framework series really started from the Higher Education Academy days, and sort of 2016. We published a complete set of 6 frameworks. It was clear, particularly sort of, how the educational landscape has changed, that the literature was really advancing in all of these areas. So we felt it was time to do an update and look at the literature from sort of 2016 through to 21-22 and see how the landscape had changed. And during that work, we also expanded the number of frameworks that we were thinking about. So you will see that enterprise and entrepreneurship was added, inclusive curriculum was added, and education for sustainable development. So I think all key areas that I'm sure colleagues are exploring in their own institutions. Each of the frameworks in the new revised frameworks are based around the same structure, i.e. they are student-centred. They're focused on what it is that a student needs in order to excel and be successful. They're then surrounded by the educators and then finally the institutions. And I'm just going to explore what that looks like in terms of the flexible learning framework. So starting in the institutional lens, obviously the institution sets the strategy for embedding flexible learning. It's part of their mission or their vision for what they want to be known as an institution. And they also, once they've identified those sort of strategic priorities, they need to put certain things in place to make sure that they happen. That can include the appropriate digital infrastructure. It can include making sure that the learning spaces are appropriate, and making sure that staff have the competencies and confidence to deliver flexible learning. And they also have a role in developing external engagement. So the institution really are the driver for any kind of flexible learning strategy. And we are seeing across the sector now that is part of universities' mission and vision. In the middle ring, we think about the role of the educators, and we have this sort of term, sort of educators plus, because I think we recognise in the current higher education sector that there's quite a broad range of colleagues who contribute to what we could think of as education or as student learning. So this can, of course, be your lecturers, your academics, those that are designing content, delivering content, and supporting learning, but also a raft of other colleagues, including sort of professional services teams, academic tutors, career services teams, many different colleagues who contribute to that. So we want to recognise that really holistic approach to supporting student success and what that looks like across the team. And what does those combined individuals need to do? So, of course, learning design is absolutely critical to flexible learning, and we've heard some great examples from Deakin this morning about how they really focused on what does learning design look like if you're going to have a flexible model. And it's about promoting choice, of course, but also that has to be pragmatic. So what is doable within scarce resources, but also thinking about other priorities such as making sure that you have a cohesive student identity, that you engage all learners, and whilst you are promoting independent learning, you're also facilitating that kind of social learning. It's also really for any learner to actually engage in flexible learning and, of course, lifelong learning after they finish their degree programme. They are going to need both their subject-specific digital competencies to continue to work and learn in online environments, but also some generic digital capabilities. And I kind of say this rather nervously, but we've all joined a Zoom call today. I think over the last few years, everybody's developing competencies around kind of presenting and engaging in online forums such as this. But of course, it's much more wider than that. It's around collaboration. It's around networking. It's also around digital scholarship. Just a much broader raft of digital competencies that our students need, not only to succeed in their degree program, but going forwards. And of course, that also needs them to have the educators themselves also need the opportunities to make sure that they stay current in their skills and thinking about their own professional development. And finally, and probably most importantly, let's think about the students. So this framework is really geared around thinking about what opportunities does a student need within this thematic area. So some of the things that I've already mentioned, including sort of digital literacies, as well as the subject-specific digital competencies, but they also need agency to make choices. They need appropriate guidance and support, and they need to be part of collaborative learning communities so they can learn together. That's so important piece around social learning and how we engage our learners, but also developing their independent learning. And Liz Johnson from Deakin, who spoke this morning, had a wonderful graphic looking at how you start off with a high amount of scaffolded learning, and as that receives, you're growing students' independent learning and their agency to think about what and how they want to learn that meets their own goals and aspirations. So that's really just very much a run through the frameworks, and I'm sure the colleagues that are joining the call will expand on some of these elements that are particularly relevant to their own work and practice. So I'm going to hand over now. I'm going to stop sharing indeed, and hand over to our first speaker, Miriam, who's going to be telling us about what they're doing at the University of Manchester. So over to you, Miriam.
Thank you so much. Hi, colleagues. Great to be here today. And firstly, thank you so much to colleagues at Advanced HE for the kind invitation to come and present today. I'm just clicking on things in the background to make sure that I'm sharing my screen. So hopefully everybody can now see my screen. I've now lost vision of participants, but hopefully that's coming through clearly on your side. If anyone
that's coming through fine, Mary. That's perfect. Thank you.
That's what I needed. Thank you so much. Okay. So hi, welcome. I'm Dr. Miriam Firth from the University of Manchester. Please do use the QR code on screen here to connect with me for any further discussions, any other questions that suddenly arise later on this evening, morning, afternoon. Be delighted to connect with you all today. So firstly, I'm from the University of Manchester, which is a large Russell Group university in the UK. We have over 40,000 students, over 210 different buildings on campus, 6,000 staff. So it's quite a sizable university. And in that way, I think it's quite useful to see this case study from Manchester because it offers you insights into how we've looked at flexible learning from this type of university. Anyone who attended the Advanced HE National Conference back in 2023 will have already heard from the leader in our institution from the Flexible Learning Programme. So it's Professor Danielle George who leads this project as our Associate Vice President for Teaching and Learning across the university. FLP itself has over 50 members, and I'm here just today as one representative from this larger group. So as one of Dan's academic leads in the programme, I'm really delighted to talk to you about FLP and about what we've been doing at Manchester. So what shall I cover today? Well, Advanced HE has asked us to look at the challenges and benefits, so I'm going to share some of our journey here at the University of Manchester, but I hope it won't be as dramatic as some of the journeys that our X Factor contestants go through, but hopefully it will offer you some new perspectives on how we've done things, how you might want to look at things for your own institution, perhaps to avoid some of the things that we found as challenges, but that will hopefully offer you an insight into how we've done things here. And I think it's worth noting that we didn't apply a specific framework. When we first started looking at flexible learning, we did institute it as part of an overarching strategy, and it's around how we make sure that flexible learning and lifelong learning is embedded for all learners. So it came from adding that to strategy, and then the Flexible Learning Programme, which I'm an academic lead of, is a strategic change programme. So we liaise with all key stakeholders, including our Institute for Teaching Learning and academic experts within lots of different departments. But I think it's important to note that this was and is a strategic change programme looking to embed this across an institution. But how does this look in practice? Well, the next slide is going to offer you an overview of how flexible learning is going to be working here at the University of Manchester.
Our world is changing. So are the ways we live and the ways we study. So whatever your commitments, wherever you are in the world.
大家好，欢迎来到我们第一堂国际商务课。今天我会给你们介绍一下课程大纲。
At whatever stage of your career.
Meet on campus for medicine lecture.
And whatever changes life brings your way. You can always develop new skills and gain qualifications in a way that works for you.
Où se trouve la bibliothèque?
Où se trouve la bibliothèque?
Où se trouve la bibliothèque? Où se trouve la bibliothèque?
So now we understand how to make our processes more sustainable. Next time we'll focus on how to apply those principles to mass production.
We're shaping the future of education. On campus and and online. So you can do it your way.
Okay, so I love that video first off. I just think it's so inspiring to think of the different forms of learners that we can now support in universities. You know, I've worked in higher education for over 20 years, and I just think it's so important that we offer those opportunities to as many learners in as many life stages as possible. But how are we going about realising this? And I think lots of us are looking to open our pathways and develop new curricula, but how are we doing this? And on the next couple of slides, I'm going to offer you two frameworks or ways of positioning our work from flexible learning at Manchester. And I think the first thing to mention is we don't see ourselves as finished yet. So I wouldn't say that we've done everything that we want to do yet, and we've got a number of initiatives in progress and due to finish over the next couple of years. But my excellent colleague, Professor Simon Thompson, who's Professor of Hybrid Learning, set out this framework online on the screen here, which is about being centred on these 4 Ps. So P in terms of pace is that we want to engage with learners at a speed suited to them. Whether or not they start a programme and then finish it, come back a bit later, or if they're doing a micro-credential, which is again shorter in time, we want to flex in terms of the pace of the study that they're completing. The place, I think, is something that everybody is very well versed to. So we've got international centres, but they only go so far. And actually flexing via place is not just about international centres, transnational learning or distance learning. It's the synchronity or the asynchronity that we're able to then move around each learner's lifestyles. And I think at the end of that video, the fact that we have the note that says, you know, what is personal for me? What is the learning for me? We very much wanted the place to be about individual place as well. The pathway we're flexing to, I'm sure colleagues here will use the same phrasing. We look to non-standard pathways. So we're looking to flex in terms of different types of programs, new innovative types of programs. So the pathway itself needs to be agile to the life and the career of our learners. And then finally, as was mentioned by Advanced HE, the final P, practice, is essential for all the others. You know, how do we make sure that our staff and our colleagues and our students are supported to embed and action the practice that's needed? Because if we're going to open up flexibility across the other 3 Ps, we've got to make sure that our colleagues are supported to develop that effectively and efficiently. And those 4 Ps lead us to think about 3 shifts in mindset in terms of shifts in how we approach traditional curricula and traditional programs. So our flexible pathways is about us offering more choices in where, when, and how they study. You know, is it necessary for programs to start in September? Is it necessary for them to have to follow the very rigid credit-bearing framework, or can we seek to have quality and excellence in our teaching and learning in lots more flexible ways? We want to increase the range of part-time learners, and again, as we mentioned before, lifelong learning isn't just about having the skills to be able to develop lifelong learning in your later career, but also coming back into education. Design and delivery by team is a really important cornerstone at FLP at Manchester. So myself, I'm an academic in an education department, and I have lots of expertise in employability education, but I might not have the technical expertise to set up the required technology for online teaching and delivery, nor may I have the expertise in terms of how to engage with diverse groups of students from areas that I haven't worked with before. So the idea of design and delivery by team is about supporting everybody, not just to look at new curricula, new programs individually and in different departments, but actually work together with experts in lots of different areas to make sure that those new pathways lift off and go as succeeded. And finally, flexible first. And again, this is a really, really excellent priority that we put forwards, where we don't just say, let's have a look at the flexibility in the 4 Ps, But let's have that as a baseline. Let's think, okay, Flex First has to be our priority. We cannot just think of programs in terms of static, fixed things, but actually that we want to flex first and embed that flexibility in these programs from the outset. So that's a bit of an overview of how we've done this at Manchester. But as anybody working at home with an animal, it doesn't have to be a cat, knows, we've had challenges, and I'm delighted I'm not working at home with my 2 cats today. They're not walking over any of my screens today, which is great. But we have had challenges, and that's why I'd like to talk about some of these in brief today, to highlight some of this and to share some of this practice as well. So I've summarised 2 here for you, colleagues, but some of these are also positives. First of all, the cultural challenges, and I think this is obvious when you're looking to change practice, when you're looking into non-standard ways of working, of course there's going to be cultural shifts there. Those cultural shifts are changing ways in which we teach and develop programs, but also it's cultural in terms of maintaining the engagement. The ways we work in terms of how we teach and engage with students change, but then also the patterns of work change as well. So I think those cultural changes, maintaining engagement, have been a significant challenge. But they're not unique to FLP. I think the sector's going through a lot of changes, outside of flexible learning and outside of lots of other strategic change programs, that I think those cultural changes are inherent, and we're learning to deal with lots of change. In terms of technology, well, certainly if you're running anything at distance or anything in a new flexible pathway, our learners and our staff have got lots of changes in terms of access and equity, digital literacy. One of my colleagues, Caroline Boucher, is leading on our digital learning environment at the moment. So as part of this programme, it might be interesting for colleagues to learn that our entire DLE is being redone. We're moving from Blackboard to Canvas. So it's massive, and if I haven't already mentioned, it's a £20+ million strategic change programme. We've got lots of things happening. So we're meeting those technological challenges by specifically making sure there's an academic lead, there's money invested, we're implementing the change so that we can then look to support new programmes and new flexibility in the future. So just a couple of challenges, but I'd like to now look at some of the benefits. And I think the first thing to say is that we haven't finished as a strategic change programme yet. So we're kind of nearing the end of lots of things, but we're still finishing off a lot of our projects. And firstly, enhanced access, I think, is one of the most incredible benefits we've seen. If we're going to develop new flexibility, we are naturally talking with and integrating loads more new stakeholders, people that have never come across the University of Manchester, people that don't know about our areas of expertise. So that's the first thing. Secondly, personalised learning. Some of you might have heard about my own national optionality project. So that's looking at student choice in assessment. We've got my colleague Alison Fisher, who leads on our USIL across the whole university, developing more interdisciplinary units. The preliminary data that we're getting is showing that we're actually getting improved outcomes as well, particularly around inclusion and access. Because when you develop more personalised learning, when you look to meet the needs of a wider changing society, you naturally improve those potential prospects and opportunities for those new learners. As I said before, but culture change is also positive. We've got my colleague Jane Moodney, who's leading on digital skills and literacy. So we've now signed up with LinkedIn Learning. We've got loads more courses now available to staff. Impacting on sector knowledge. So again, my colleague Ange Davies is looking at supporting UNESCO City of Lifelong Learning here from Manchester. So we've got lots and lots of avenues, lots of new things that we're doing where we're seeing incredible benefits, incredible positive changes. And the last thing on here that I've signalled as well is that through being a strategic change programme, we are also paving new roads for new strategic change programmes to come along. We've hit lots of barriers internally, which we've then developed and led us as you know, how we then navigate that in future. You know, what lessons have we learned? How can we support other colleagues? So I hope that gives you a very, very quick round robin of what we've been doing at Manchester. I'm delighted to take any questions. I'm delighted to connect with colleagues today. If there's anything that we can do as a team to offer any support, we'd be delighted to do so. So thank you so much again to Advance HE. It's a pleasure to be here with so many colleagues today. And I'll pause there. I'll stop sharing as well so that I can see everyone and to take any questions.
Thanks, Miriam. I think we'll save all the questions right to the end. So if anybody's going to pop any questions in the chat, please do so. Some of them Miriam might be able to just respond to directly, but otherwise we'll just have a little bit of a Q&A right at the end with both groups of speakers. So thanks for that. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think it's really interesting. You know, you've got to have that kind of model of where you want to go, that vision of where you want to go and why you're doing it. And then that can help you overcome some of those challenges that are going to be along the way. Brilliant. Thank you. And I think let's hand over to the Reading team. And I think it's Michael that's starting us off. Is that right?
That's right, Kay.
Yeah. And I think their approach, again, it has that kind of vision of we've got flexibility to promote inclusion. So thank you very much. I'll hand over to you and I'll turn my camera off.
Thank you, Kay.
Yeah, we can see that perfectly.
Great. Thank you. So hello, everyone. Our session today is about the approaches we've taken at the University of Reading to use curriculum design and digitally enabled learning to encourage learning environments and programs that are flexible, student-centered and inclusive across the institution. So I'm just not the only one speaking. There's a group of us who will be in the chat and on camera and microphone. So I'll just introduce us from the top. Adam Bailey, you'll hear from Adam Bailey, Technology Enhanced Learning Advisory Manager. Nina Brooke, Academic Staff Development Manager. Jackie Fairbairn, Senior TEL Advisor. Vicky Holmes, Head of Technology Enhanced Learning. And myself, an academic developer, and we're all part of the Centre for Quality Support and Development, which is the university's Centre for Teaching and Learning. Vicky, Adam and I will be doing most of the speaking today, and Nina and Jackie will be in the chat and we'll jump on during Q&A. Next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. So just very briefly to give you some context about the University of Reading, we are a campus-based university in the UK. We are proud to be one of the greenest in the country, and we are both research and teaching intensive and have a broad-based offer of programs across a full range of disciplines. We are a diverse academic community in both staff and students. And we prioritize that student experience as a large part of what we do. And we have always trying to enhance teaching, learning and assessment. And we'll be talking about a major project that has just kind of wrapped up to do that, to enhance our teaching and learning and program offer. Next slide, please, Adam. Thank you. So to just set the scene a bit more about why inclusive teaching and learning, as an institution, we're quite focused on awarding gaps and closing those awarding gaps, which are in line with sector average. But due to scarce resources in CQSD and elsewhere across the institution, we are currently really focusing on closing the major gaps, which are for Black, minority, ethnic and commuter students. So to kind of, you know, I guess illustrate those gaps, we have a couple of personas here. So students personas of students who can represent those gaps, and these were developed by students. So we worked with students to develop these I suppose, stereotypes, and we often use these stereotypical students. We often use these in workshops to kind of, or awarding gap focused workshops. So just from the top here, we have Ash, who is a dedicated student who decided to switch careers and pursue a part-time undergraduate degree. A mature student and commutes from Newbury on the train. Struggles in making commitments outside of with commitments outside of scheduled university study, and has a part-time job and parenting responsibilities and can often miss class. Amal is currently enrolled in a master's degree program, having completed an undergraduate degree in Lebanon, and it's the first time they've lived away from their family. They're bilingual and speaks 3 languages, Arabic, French, and English. However, Amal often struggles to build interpersonal connections with native English speakers and finds it challenging to comprehend that dialogue and slang, particularly in the lecture theatre environment, and also feels a sense of alienation. So we can see multiple possibilities for how to design curriculum and use technology-enhanced learning and flexible learning to benefit these students. And I guess the key framing question for us is, how do we realise this potential, get staff on board and bring about positive student-centred change? So we'll come back to Ash and Amal later, but I'll hand over to you, Vicky.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Thanks. Thank you, Michael. So there have been 2 sort of big strategic change projects taking place at Reading over the last sort of 3 to 4 years, and those have really provided opportunities for us to increase flexibility for students. The portfolio review project, this was a multi-stranded project aimed at improving the quality of the student experience, but at the same time also reducing the volume and the complexity of the portfolio. So it included changes to institutional structures, for example, revising the shape, the size, the choice of modules, and creating a more coherent framework for students. Then there was a big piece around curriculum design. So this entailed aligning teaching and learning approaches, assessment of feedback strategies, and really with the aim of making it clearer for learners as to how all the constituent parts of their learning are fitted together. And another element was having a really strong institutional approach to digitally enabled learning. Again, this had been used a lot, across Reading, but what we wanted to do was to provide a more consistent and inclusive learning environment, and we could see the opportunities that digitally enabled learning could offer. Now, at the same time, there was also another parallel project going on, which is about moving to a new version of a VLE. So staying with the same VLE, but moving to a version that offered significantly different features and structures. And we could see that this could be taken as purely a technical change project, but we saw there would be the potential to introduce changes, the way that the VLE was structured, the way that it was used, that could then support the overarching aims that were in the portfolio review project. So for us, it was really important that we connected and we synchronized these 2 projects so that they could benefit from each other and we could work together with those. Next slide, please. So just wanted to relate our work to the flexible learning framework. We were working obviously with the previous version of the framework here, so I realise people may not be as familiar with this version, but we found this particular articulation very helpful. In this version, the framework focuses on these 4 key areas, so on the outer edges of this circle, looking at institutional systems, technology enhanced learning, pedagogical approaches and employment. And this really resonated with the work that we were doing. We felt that in particular the systems, the technology enhanced learning, the pedagogical approaches were a very key part of what we were trying to provide with flexible learning. Next slide, please. But just to sort of take that a little bit further, I think what was really important for us at Reading was thinking about the interconnectedness of these elements and not seeing them as separate. And looking back on our work and what we've achieved, I think often it was working at these intersections where the greatest gains were made. So not, for example, just looking at technology enhanced learning in isolation, but thinking about the impact and how that relates to institutional structures or how that fits within our pedagogical approaches. And a phrase that was used in the previous framework, which we really liked, was around balanced pragmatism. And I think this is absolutely crucial in thinking about flexible learning. You are trying to work across multi areas of focus, and sometimes it's about compromise and pragmatism in order to benefit the whole picture that you're pulling together. So in the examples that we're going to show, we'll try and illustrate some of those intersections and how we worked with those. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Vicky. So Vicky just outlined the portfolio review project, shorthand PRP, which is the first of our 3 examples of flexible learning we'll talk about. Because at the core of this project, from the perspective of pedagogy and the student experience, was a institution-wide design process, curriculum design process, which established clear guidelines for enhancing the student-centered elements, like digitally enabled learning in programs and modules. So we designed the process to be flexible and maximize our academic staff's autonomy to make decisions to reflect their students and context, or to collaborate directly with students and staff. However, we did find many preferred to be guided through the expectations and the timelines of this project. We had paperwork submissions to stage and time the process, so we provided them with reporting requirements or check-in points along the way to help staff prioritise the work required for curriculum change and progress, and provide opportunities for formative feedback. These check-in points also allowed us to develop a holistic understanding of the teaching and assessment across the department, school and institution, so we could pragmatically decide where to focus additional support and attention, or where more guidance and messaging might be needed. And this was in the interest of making the most of our scarce resources to support colleagues. Curriculum design was underpinned by a centrally located pedagogical guidance that was student-centered and consultatively and collaboratively developed, but it was owned by schools who had autonomy and choice about how they went about interpreting and implementing the guidance in their disciplines and contexts to meet the needs of their students and staff. To further support them, a series of program design workshops were rolled out in a number of areas, and this enabled program teams to spend focused time to discuss teaching and learning, with the aim of ensuring students had consistent and more active collaborative learning experiences across their programs, but also enhanced flexibility in how they could approach their studies. So we interpret this is an example of developing institutional systems and structures within which creative thinking, innovative and contextualized approaches to learning and teaching can be considered. Next slide, please. So pictured here is on the left is one of our green guides, this one on embedding, facilitating and supporting inclusive learning. It stresses the importance of flexible learning by encouraging educators to create and embed student choice and personal flexibility in how students approach learning activities, content, and assessment. So during PRP, the content of guides like this were published report style, but since the end of PRP last year, they've been published on our website as external facing guides. And this format was developed through listening to staff feedback about the original guidance, including critiquing its length and text heaviness. So these guides are much more visual and approachable. On the right is a photo of an ABC curriculum design workshop. So these were rolled out across the institutions, and these were typically 90 minutes to 2 hours. And if you aren't familiar with ABC, it's a learning design method developed at UCL a decade ago and draws in principles from Diana Laurelard's conversational learning framework. And we've made adaptations to it to work more optimally for us. The outcome of that workshop is a storyboard, which you can see pictured there, or at least one that's in the development. And the process, as I hinted earlier, enables that discussion among program teams and really draws their focus on the student journey and where learning variety and digitally enabled learning can be utilised to enhance the student experience. But due to the scale of programs to be redeveloped during PRP, we ran the train the trainer sessions to equip program teams to run their own sessions in their schools and purchase large quantities of workshop materials to enable that to happen. With that, I'll pass on to Vicky now to discuss digitally enabled learning.
Thank you. So thinking about digitally enabled learning, we wanted to consider how approaches to that could be embedded within the design process that Michael's just outlined. So it'd be important to be positioning digitally enabled learning as part of the designed curriculum rather than some technological addition. And we felt that digitally enabled learning could be a very powerful enabler of inclusive learning and really help to benefit students that could be at risk of falling into awarding gaps. And a lot of our work was informed by working with students, particularly asking them to reflect on their experiences through COVID and what things that they had felt had been beneficial for them during this period. And the examples that are pictured here are the output of an activity that we did with a panel of students, where we asked them to be creative and visualize their ideal day if they could take advantage of any combination of in-person and digitally enabled learning. What would they see that their ideal day would look like? Fabulous examples that we got back. But I think the key message that we took from that was that students really do value the face-to-face teaching, and it would be important that that was still very present in their experience, but how much that they valued the flexibility that digitally enabled learning offered. And they had very quite clear preferences around where they could really see that would particularly advantage their learning. So the challenge for us then was how to articulate this in a way to colleagues that would be meaningful to them and would allow them to apply this in practice in a way that didn't overcomplicate the message. And we didn't get this right first time, and maybe that's something we can explore in the questions. But what we've now arrived at is articulating the approach through a model which helps staff structure student learning and think about where digitally enabled learning can help to create that flexible curriculum. So the model that you see here is a wraparound model. And the idea is that it focuses attention on making deliberate connections between a live teaching session and what happens before and afterwards, bringing together then in-person and digital and non-digital learning approaches. So in the middle, you have your scheduled activity, and these are synchronous activities taking place at a specific time with a member of staff involved. And for us being a campus university, the majority of these would be in person, but there is, of course, options to run those online. But importantly, around those are then what we call self-scheduled activities. So these are asynchronous, and importantly, the students have flexibility and they can choose when to do these within a specified framework. So this isn't independent learning, this is a required part of the programme and a deliberately designed activity, but gives students some flexibility in how to engage with that. And again, there are many, many opportunities where digitally enabled learning can help support and promote these different activities. And as an institution, we provide a suite of technologies that colleagues can use to put in place. So the VLE is very much a big part of that, but there are also other technologies like Padlet, like quizzes, screencasts, recording. So a whole wealth of different things that colleagues can use. But the VLE is a major component and is the central hub that students go to for their learning. And so we felt that making changes with the VLE could really help drive forward what we were trying to achieve with flexible learning. Next slide, please.
So as has been described, a key driver for moving to the updated version of our virtual learning environment was to capitalise on the revised features and functionality to support the portfolio review process, but also to align the use of the virtual learning environment with our digitally enabled learning approach. At Reading, we use Blackboard as our VLE, and we've moved to a new version called Ultra. It's sufficiently different to what colleagues and students have used before that it meant it wasn't just a technical update, but we could use that as a catalyst to drive the redesign of modules. And to do this, we did quite a few different things. But for example, we didn't roll over any previous content from previous modules. So colleagues started with empty course shells that used an institutional course template, and we asked them to follow that template, and our training and provision was focused around how people got the best out of that template and did that with the digitally enabled learning model. The new VLE had a flat content structure, removed the ability to nest folders within each other, and so we took advantage of that because it required colleagues to reevaluate their learning materials, and that fresh start prompted academics to review and recreate their content with one of the sort of the extra benefits that the overall accessibility of their digital materials also increased. And we deliberately chose system settings that meant that promoted inclusion. For example, we had feedback from students that they liked a feature called progress tracking that let them know what they'd looked at and check back on that. And so we made sure that was a fixed enabled feature in all courses. And we also standardized all our support information and provided that centrally through centrally authored reusable learning objects. The virtual learning environment we're moving to is fully mobile compatible, and that meant it could act as a foundation for students to learn flexibly. The entire course template was a co-design process with students and staff through a series of workshops. And we fed in critically the student feedback about what they wanted and how they wanted things to be represented. So we have a weekly structure. The template prioritizes assessment, the reading list, the resources. But we also wanted that flexibility where schools had individual requirements that meant they need to be represented differently in the template, but also to standardize or keep that consistency. So for example, modules with fieldwork, modules on joint programs. So overall, we're looking to implement, or we've implemented a design that increases the predictability, both to encourage a sense of belonging in the online space, but also let academics know what they're meant to do. And so that greater consistency in the VLE and the setup and the learning materials not only underpin students' personal flexibility, but it should also allow us to have more meaningful learning analytics to help us make future data-informed decisions. How are we doing for time? Just to go back and sort of wrap this up, thinking about our personas and the archetypes, Ash and Amal, based around those terms, accessibility, flexibility, and inclusion. I mean, here we can see that providing those foundations with this approach is intended to enable somebody like Ash to engage with their module online in a meaningful way that fits around their commitments. They've got a regular structure so they can locate and find things quickly and easily, and they can see the materials and activities in context, and they know what's coming up. Ash has got some flexibility to engage with materials asynchronously, and they can stay connected even when they're unable to attend class in person. And that mobile compatibility I mentioned means that everything looks the same on any device they're using. So it's a convenient way, for example, for them to catch up quickly with lecture notes when they're on the train traveling. And we've got a feature called Ally, which means then with the improved accessibility of our learning materials, Ash can choose what format or for their preference they want to engage with those materials in. For Amal, again, similar benefits, but for different reasons. That online learning space creates a supportive environment where Amal can feel valued. There's those online interactions for that self-scheduled activity, and we're trying to promote that cross-cultural interactions and connections through those collaborative activities that relate directly to the in-person teaching. Hopefully we've got consistency in the VLE around sort of the syntax, the layout of the courses that's reassuring with Amal as we're having English as an additional language. And again, asynchronous self-scheduled activities, options to participate in discussions, hopefully overcome some of those challenges of deciphering slang and dialect, and even allow Amal perhaps to learn from different time zones if he needs to travel home back to his country. So those are the sorts of things we've been engaging in.
And I think just to draw together, I think you can see across the work that we've done some themes I think that have been really important. One has been the collaboration and the co-creation between students and staff. Certainly as a central group, we've worked closely with staff and students, but we know students have worked in departments under various different schemes and have been really an integral part of developing the curriculum. Michael again talked very much about it being school owned, so it's very much a school driven process. And I think that has ensured that there's the disciplinary integrity and that schools have felt that their signature pedagogies are still very much in their planning and in their programmes. Michael's also outlined the sort of very structured approach that we've taken, but also as well this very collaborative approach as well. Typically, programme development can often be driven forward by one person, but I think through the workshops and through other approaches, it's been much more of a shared leadership and involve more people. And I think these have all been important parts of the success of what we've done, underpinned maybe to round off with the balanced pragmatism as always, and always sort of making choices and compromises as needed to get the best overall outcome. So thank you. We'll finish up there. I'm very aware of time, but very interested to hear people's reflections on this and also whether what we're doing is similar or resonates in what you've done.
Thank you so much for that, Vicky and team. That was fantastic. And I will say, I think it's brilliant that you're sort of using the original framework. That very much informed the development of the new one, and there's a lot of themes were carried across. And one that definitely stayed in there was that kind of idea of balanced pragmatism. Flexible learning is resource intensive, and there are other drivers around that. So that was really great to hear. Colleagues, I'm just going to sort of share a few follow-up slides at the moment. while I know colleagues have been asking questions in the chat, and I give all the speakers just a few moments just to have a look through and see if they want to expand on any of those, just while I share a couple of slides here. Okay, so really just sort of thinking about, obviously this is a large and complex area, and there's lots of different ways that you and your colleagues might want support to take this forward. We do obviously offer tailored or bespoke consultancy that can work with you at any level, from a program team, faculty, to a whole institution. And we've carried out many consultancy projects that have really supported the development of flexible learning models and approaches, and making sure that that is understood both sort of practically, technically, culturally across the institution. A part of that might include your either reviews of strategies to make sure they're really doing what an institution wants, or a portfolio review. So the strategy might be in place, but does your courses actually embed that strategy? And we can certainly support with work in that area. And then finally, I think, critically in these areas is staff development. How do we make sure that colleagues are enabled, empowered, and have the confidence to be able to deliver learning across all these different mediums? We're also really keen to hear voices from the sector. Our webinar series and our podcast series are really looking for input from colleagues. We can kind of go from the literature, as I said at the start, to develop the frameworks and to kind of explore what does that mean and look like in practice. But that's the sort of the next stage, isn't it? What does that really look like? What does that look like when it's being implemented? What are the challenges? What have been the impact on students? And it was great to hear in both of those presentations that one of the drivers for this has been to provide a more inclusive learning environment, opening up higher education and allowing more people to be successful, closing those awarding gaps and widening access. So I really, really appreciate both those approaches. I'm going to stop sharing and then just have a look back in the chat to see if there's any final questions or comments for the audience. Andy, a very easy question there. If you contact Tom, he put his contact details there. If you would like to offer a webinar, we'd be more than interested to hear about that. Colleagues, has any of our speakers picked up a question they want to relate to or discuss? We've got about 5 minutes left. I think there's been a couple of questions around that kind of hybrid model. So there's the pre-learning, there's the in-person or synchronous learning that can be in-person or online, and then the post activities. And we've definitely promoted that model. But there's a few colleagues there asking, how do you make sure that students engage with that? I can give you my answer to that, but it'd be interesting to hear what colleagues have to say on that one. I don't know if Miri or anybody from Reading wants to speak to that idea.
So was this the question? So I was just going through the chat. Was that the question around the self-scheduled learning?
It's around, I think the question is broadly around, this model is dependent on students doing that pre-learning, so they come to the in-person or the synchronous piece, whether that's in-person or online, ready and prepared and ready for the learning. And I noticed in one of the slides it kind of said, I'd like to come to it having done the pre-reading, but sometimes it's a bit, I'm not really ready and I haven't looked at it because the reading's too long, too boring, etc. So I think it's how do we make sure that students actually do that pre-work and come suitably prepared, so you can have a really engaging social learning experience rather than go through theory or content.
I think part of that is also comes back to the sort of the deliberate design of this. So if you give a rather non-specific task with no particular output, the students are less likely to engage with it. But we're talking about activities here that are very deliberately designed, very clearly specified, and may actually include some output. So it may not just be do some reading, but it might be do some reading and then pose some questions on this discussion board prior to coming to the session. So I think including some kind of output or action that's very clearly specified for the students is going to encourage that engagement with those activities and make it clear to the colleagues where this has been achieved.
Yeah, absolutely, Vicky. And I think that's exactly it. Making it clear to students how long a pre-learning activity is going to take. This should be a 20-minute read. Read this, create some bullet points, write 3 questions that you're going to bring to the in-person session. There's a time that they know how much time they've got to allow for it. There's an output, and it's clearly linked to what they're doing in the classroom. And then too many times this has failed, I think, because either the academic has a group of students, and then they go, okay, who's done the pre-reading? And if people haven't, they go, okay, well, I'm just going to go through all that again. And you've completely then all the ones that are exhibiting the good behaviors, doing the pre-learning, are now going, well, that was a waste of time, I'm never going to do it again. And then the thing's sunk. You just got to power on and go, right, well, okay, this is what we're learning today. If you haven't done the prep, that's your choice. I'm not going to disadvantage those that have done the prep. But yeah, it has to be structured, it has to be linked to the learning, and it has to be time limited, not watch 3 hours of videos or what have you. I think it has to link to the learning. I think we have to treat our students a bit more maturely than feeding them marks. And that also requires a culture across the team. So taking that holistic approach across the team, I think is really powerful as well. Colleagues, there's loads of stuff in the chat there. I don't know if we've got time for one more question. Miriam or Reading team, have you spotted any other questions you want to answer? I think a lot of them have already been answered in the conversation. Okay, I can't see anything that's jumping out to me unless anybody wants to discuss a final point. Colleagues, it just remains for me to thank our speakers who have really done a fantastic job of exploring the drivers for flexible learning, the challenges, their approaches, and thank you all for colleagues participating in the chat and the discussion. Daniel, I really like your point there, getting that ethos and culture of learning. I think it's absolutely critical. So thank you for that. The recording and the slides will all be sent out to you by our Advanced HE colleagues, I think, in the next couple of days. So thank you again. Time to go and get some lunch, I think. And yes, hopefully see you all at the next webinar. Which I'm not even sure what the next one's on. I should have got that. Possibly internationalization, but maybe one of my colleagues will pop that in the chat. All right, thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Lovely.